Hello and Happy New Year. Welcome to Journalists Hangout UK, the show where we discuss issues both African and worldwide which are affecting the continent. And we look at how those issues are seen at home and in the African diaspora. I'm Efwa Hirsch and I'm pleased to welcome our panel, Ayo Johnson, journalist and specialist in African affairs, Priscilla Nwipo, public affairs analyst, and Lanre Akinola, editor of African Business. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great break. And democracy, unlike us, never rests. So while we were all enjoying our Boxing Day leftovers, Liberia was busy electing a new president. Let's take a little look.
When I met the president, I said to her, we are not here to break anything that's in place already. We want to add on the gains that we made, to make sure that we complete that legacy.
Well, George Weah, who most of us know and love from his very illustrious career as a footballer, he's aged, hasn't he, Lanre? I hardly recognise him from his AC Milan days. What are your initial thoughts about Liberia's newest president?
Well, potentially it could be an exciting shift. His background is unconventional, and if he's half as good at politics as he was at football, we're in for quite a show, but we'll have to wait and see. It's easier said than done.
Priscilla?
I thought fantastic. At last, he's finally won. But I thought it was interesting to note what is happening on the continent. As Lanre says, there's a shift away from the institution, as it were, the political institution, and to the drive of the youth to select and have something new. So, welcome. Ayo, something new?
He's like an exciting character, great footballer. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to translate that into political success. It's going to be very difficult for him. He's gone to school, he's studied, he's learned, apparently he's come back, but I'm not sure if I could become a football coach if I chose to go and study with no experience. So that's where his problems are. So
Lanre, you mentioned as well that he's from an unconventional background. Do you think that Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf, who's from a very conventional background, very distinguished, very competent, but failed at the end of her term to really capitalise on the hope of people in Liberia that she could bring transformation? Is this a reaction against that and a look for somebody from the outside who's actually lived through the poverty and challenges of Liberia as a real life experience?
Well, he has no shortage of authenticity, and that has undoubtedly played a role in this. The youth of Liberia are very enthusiastic about him. This is my understanding, that they played a big part in getting him elected, which has to be representative of a real hunger for change and something different. Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf is very highly regarded internationally. I believe she was Africa's first female head of state, and that in itself is quite an accomplishment. But yes, by all accounts, she has not lived up to some of those expectations. Whether or not George Weah can pick up where she's left off, we'll have to wait and see. It's impossible to tell at this point. But yeah, clearly there is an element of that, a need and a thirst for something different.
Africa's population is younger than ever, and Liberia in particular, almost half of its population is under 15. Mm-hmm. Do you think we'll see more of this appeal specifically to the young from the kind of people who have this kind of iconic reputation, really?
We have to, because the continent as a whole is shifting. We have far more younger people than we have old. The continent is very vibrant in terms of a youthful thinking. And of course, politicians like George Weah, be it that he, as you said, is not as young as we once wish he was, he can appeal to that masses. Clearly, I think if he doesn't achieve what he set up, the youth themselves would take to the streets. And we've seen already that Liberia is a very volatile country, very fragmented, sometimes very fragile, and that fragility always become apparent when we have problems. And of course, George Weah will face those problems if he doesn't meet the challenges with the youth right now.
And of course, it's momentous for Liberia to hand power from one democratically elected leader to another for the first time in more than 60 years. But like you said, there is a volatility. I think many people, Priscilla, are a little bit nervous when they see elections happening in Liberia. And Weah very notably appealed deliberately to young men who are his biggest support base, which is a real contrast to Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf, who appealed very specifically to women and mobilised them. Are you worried about any tension in the way that he's mobilised the male vote? And do you see this as a potential fault line that could cause problems in the long term?
No, because I think he has the appeal and he has what it takes to also mobilize the other half of society, which are the women. What we need to recognize here is that George Weah, he may be old in his 50s, but he's actually young in comparison to what we would normally have for, you know, a president in most African countries, and that, you know, Sirleaf was quite old herself. So I think that he's relatively young, and thus he's able to influence the young, and especially it's necessary for the young men to have somebody to aspire to have some kind of hope, and to have a character like George. And let's also not forget that he didn't just, you know, move over from football to become president. He took time to prepare himself. He went and studied. He went, and he was also part of the last administration also. So he's done some kind of groundwork. He's been working towards this. So I would like to believe that by the time he's through, he will make a better impact. Because I would like to think that with his experience, having been part of the last administration and seeing how some things were poorly handled, that he would do better. Although I am a little bit concerned about some of his associates, but I'd like to think that he can do a lot better and encourage male and female young people of Liberia to participate and be part of the movement going forward.
Let's talk about his actual policy platform. It's a pretty standard developmental platform, isn't it, Lanre? Is there anything about what he is promising that gives you hope that he will be able to meet those quite high expectations, you know, after the disappointment of the last government?
Well, it's a generational challenge, and no matter how well he does in office, he's not going to be able to fix it. It's going to take, you know, several administrations to address the underlying needs of a youthful population. A key issue is job creation. He said Liberia is open for business. I think he's going to have a hard time attracting much business. Liberia is a very small market, and you know, it's hard enough for countries like Nigeria to get people interested. Liberia will definitely struggle. But I think the best that we can hope for is that he lays foundations, that he builds on what Ellen Johnson Sirleaf has put in place, and that he can help to consolidate better governance, which will set up Liberia for you know, better prospects in the medium to long term. I don't think we should expect too much, you know, from him either, not least because his term is going to be limited, and we know the nature of politics. You know, so much energy goes into things that aren't part of the core mandate of actually running the country. A lot of it is managing competing interests, and it won't be long before he's thinking about re-election. You know, but we'll see.
I don't agree that, you know, he's going to struggle in terms of getting business in. I think, as you mentioned, Nigeria is struggling. The main problem that affects Africa and their struggles is lack of good governance and lack of the right policy and lack of accountability. And I think if he can establish that, he doesn't need to fix the whole of Liberia. He just needs to put some key things in place to ensure that Liberia can go forward. And just if he should just focus on just one area, perhaps. But he has, you know, the right governance in place. He has the right policies in place that will attract, because I think any investor, knowing that they can get their money out easily, knowing that, you know, there is ease of doing business, knowing that there won't be bottlenecks and, you know, things that are going to hold them back, which unfortunately it's what we see right across Africa, which prevents development. So I think if he could refresh those areas, he will certainly, you know, be able to attract and take Liberia to a degree.
Though. One of the biggest
but
issues,
it's a start.
One of the biggest issues is market size. And I
agree, but
it doesn't matter who
start.
you speak to. It doesn't matter if there are opportunities. This is the most common response is, if the market is not big enough, you're just going to struggle to attract attention.
But
I'm not suggesting there's nothing to do.
But we can't write off smaller countries, can we? And on that note, it's Sierra Leone next up for elections in March. The neighbouring country, actually looking perhaps that it's going to move the opposite direction, to have more of a technocratic candidate. What do you see as the prospects for Sierra Leone this year?
Well, the region is facing change. Liberia has already faced that change, and of course neighbouring Sierra Leone is aspiring to that change. It's questionable. The APC party, which is the ruling party, they are still very strong. Many people have written them off, but I think they've got to be careful about that. But of course, we also have some new rising stars, you know, Dr. Kandi Minkela, Cameron, and a few others who are really saying that they form their own parties, and they think that hopefully people will start voting outside of tribal politics if they have got those messages across. If people have really wisened up to the fact that they can vote outside of the traditional parties, outside of tribal mix, can vote with their hearts, vote with what they know to be right, we could see a change. but it's yet to be determined whether the people have evolved to the levels where their consciousness are at that point where they can make those choices.
And what do you see in terms of the policies on offer? Do you see the potential for anything transformative, and depending on who is elected in Sierra Leone?
Well, we are at a tipping point, a crossroads. Sierra Leone would not be the same beyond the elections, because whoever comes to power, if it's the ruling power, they know they've got to do that much more. What they've done before is not good enough. If it's a new party, they are there to show that the ruling party was bad, and they're going to do that much more in themselves. So anyone that comes to power beyond the 18th of March when elections are held would aspire to do that much more, because the people are requesting that.
And Priscilla, I was talking about moving beyond traditional ethnic voting patterns. I mean, isn't that something that's interesting about Liberia? You know, Ellen Sirleaf-Johnson mobilised market women across the board, whereas mobilised young people, young men across the board. Is that tell us something about the way democracy is changing in African countries, and the potential for new figures to appeal to untraditional patterns?
Absolutely, and I see this wave traveling right across, you know, the west coast of Africa and beyond, because I believe with the onset of social media now, you know, it's no longer the age and the era where the old political institution and the political elites would, you know, they could, if you like, decide what the population would get to know about, and they decide who gets what and how. But today, everybody is getting involved. You know, and what we're seeing in Nigeria, for instance, is that you're seeing a lot of contradictions. The government are going one way and the people are saying, hey, that's not the truth, that's not how it should be. And that conversation is going on. And as we see in Liberia, we will see it in Sierra Leone. And I do believe, as Ayo is saying, that it's not going to be the old, it's going to be the new, because the young are buying into. They want better governance. They no longer want to continue the lifestyle that they have. They are now open to the world and to see that a better life exists somewhere else, and it can be provided by your government, and they're starting to demand it, and they will demand it.
Thank you. So we'll have to leave it there. We'll talk more about some of these themes in the second half, and we'll take a quick break. We do have plenty more to discuss, so please join us in a few moments. Hello and welcome back to Journalists Hangout UK. I'm Efwa Hirsch and I'm pleased to welcome back our panel, Ayo Johnson, Priscilla Nwipo, Lore Akinola. So we talked about Liberia and Sierra Leone, democracy in action over Christmas, but in Equatorial Guinea we had the reverse, Lore, so claims of an attempted coup coming from the Obiang regime. Are you taking those claims seriously?
Well, Equatorial Guinea doesn't make many headlines. When it does, it tends to be around someone trying to overthrow the government. I mean, we spoke about generational change in the first half of the show and the need for fresher leadership. And Obiang in Equatorial Guinea pretty much is the epitome of the opposite of that, of the old, repressive, dynastic politics. It's a country that has a very small population. It produces oil and could be one of the most prosperous on the continent. There are certainly enough people who have a reason to get rid of Obiang. Whether or not these are valid claims, who knows? I mean, it's very difficult.
And we need to put this in context, don't we? I mean, there have been wild stories circulating about Equatorial Guinea for years. In 2011, Simon Mann claimed that George Soros was attempting a coup. Simon Mann himself was put in jail for attempting a coup. He's now one of Obiang's key advisors. Priscilla, what do you make of all of these claims around Equatorial Guinea?
You know, for me, you can't help but wonder, after the whole 2004 attempted coup and Mark Thatcher, prison sentence, fine, and sponsorship of a coup, you can't help but wonder, clearly, with it being the size that it is, 1.2 million people, and its oil reserves, clearly there's a lot of interest. So for me, I can't help but wonder who is trying to get in and why. And I equally wonder if he is standing as a guard, as it were, and preventing this from happening. There's no smoke without a fire. There's definitely somebody, a lot of interest looking into Equatorial Guinea, and it's precisely because of its size, precisely because, you know, it's chunks of little islands and so on. It makes it that much easier, if you like, if there was to be an invasion, to be able to just keep it expanded as opposed to bringing the people closer together and holding a unit. So, yeah, there is certainly some influences external.
Many of the campaign groups who work on Equatorial Guinea, especially those involved in defending journalists, there are many journalists in jail in the country, have described this as fake news, designed to distract attention from the very real threat imposed by the Obiang regime rather than against them. Do you think that it's a genuine story?
It's a genuine story. We can't not dismiss it for the reasons this is. The UN would not be sending a special envoy to that country to resolve what they believe to be some serious problems if they didn't take it seriously themselves. So if the UN has endorsed it from that perspective, I'm prepared to accept it. Excuse me. So as far as I'm concerned, it was a coup. The president has all right to be concerned. He's faced previous coups previously in 2004, as you've mentioned, with some very world backers in case of Mark Thatcher at the time, who himself was arrested in South Africa and even threatened to be sent to Equatorial Guinea if it wasn't for then Nelson Mandela, who a very vital call from Margaret Thatcher to beg clemency for her son. So we've seen already that other interests outside of the country are interested in the oil, because it couldn't be just for the people. So yes, I think the president, who's been there for a very long time, has all right to be concerned that his own personal safety is at risk. And of course, for all intents and purposes, he feels his country is at war.
We talk a lot about governance on this show. I mean, Laura, we lost in recent years Jammeh in Gambia, and
Mugabe.
now Mugabe. Obiang is one of the last of this kind of old generation, almost 40 years in power, by all definitions a dictator. Is it sustainable for him to expect to hang on to power in this changing world?
Probably not, but he's certainly going to try. You know, it doesn't sound to me there's any inclination to step down. He seems to be grooming his son, who by all accounts takes after his father, to take power. As for real threats to the regime, probably, yeah. You know, plenty of people out there who are willing to have a go at these kinds of things. I'm not convinced that the current setup is somehow more desirable. Ideally, what you'd want to see is some sort of political opening, some sort of meaningful political reform in the country that actually engages the population on some sort of meaningful terms. Again, it's a tiny country, tiny population. It has significant oil revenues. There's no reason people should be living in poverty there.
I mean,
there's no reason you should have repressive politics.
Sometimes described as the potential Brunei of Africa.
Yeah.
You know, it could be
and it certainly is.
a wealthy country with a high GDP.
I would say Equatorial Guinea only stands to gain from him moving on, ideally not by some foreign influence, but you know, why not just reform internally and open up the political space a little bit?
The thing I'd like is this hypocrisy. I mean, you've got governments like these who they say been there for too long, is not democratic. But yet still you got ExxonMobil, which is a company that's owned by the US, actually physically finding new oil, drilling the oil, taking out. So it's good to take the oil out, but it's good not to work with a man who you claim has been in power for so long. So there's a lot of hypocrisy. You know, so we're as good as bad as he is if we go in and take his oil. And anyone who does that is just as bad.
Talking of reform, we have not positive developments in the DRC. The hopes of sticking to the roadmap to peace are fading. Priscilla, any thoughts about Kabila's latest moves over the, I know, it's talking of countries that could be so prosperous, but also that we can't look at without the context of foreign actors who are busy enriching themselves as ever.
This is the problem, as Ayo says, it's all of those contradictions. On one hand, we say, you know, these dictators need to get out. And on the other hand, we have these, foreign interests that are sucking the country dry. So you begin to wonder, dictator. Is it necessary for the dictator figure to remain in place to an extent? How would the reform come about if, there's no real genuine support for reform, but it's just, we're just saying it whilst we're going beneath to encourage the destruction of the nation? It's very difficult, but I do think that, again, the fault line for me is the African Union. And the fault line for me, it's they need to be able to stand up, come together, and actually look into the interest of the African people and begin to work with anybody who's willing to work with them to bring about peace, anybody who's willing to work with them to bring about development, anybody who's willing to work with them to work towards the real interests of the people. Because in all honesty, no foreign interest can actually come in without being permitted to do so. They're able to do so because they're working hand in hand. So the contradictions are too many. People need to stand up.
We can't see more accountability from citizens of DRC or Equatorial Guinea without access to information. And one of the things Kabila has done is shut down the internet. We've seen worrying developments in Tanzania with TV stations being fined. Is this a counter trend to try and keep information away from people? And can that work, Lamri?
Without a doubt, states will always do whatever they think will, shore up their power. Will it work? No. This is why the internet is such a pain for governments and states, is that you can't shut it down. Countries like Turkey and Sudan and Egypt have repeatedly tried this. The irony is, whenever they do that, social media activity goes up rather than goes down. So it's a losing battle, but it's not surprising that they would try to clamp down on this. The good thing is that the nature of the internet makes it basically impossible to stop people communicating. It has to be a good thing.
And Ayo?
Yeah, well, I think Kabila is a leader whose time's up. He's going to leave power at the end of this year. The country will see a new leader. He can't stand anymore. So, irrespective of what he does, whether he shuts the internet down, it's going to be for a very short period of time.
And from where do you draw your optimism that he will step down? Because he was meant to before now.
Yes, but that, of course, we would have ended up with civil war if it wasn't for the Catholic Church, who broke a deal, which is the deal that we've got at the moment, which is allowing the political parties at bay, who have already been given a timetable for his move, in addition to elections that are meant to ensue. So that process would have to happen, or else the Congo, the DRC, would fall into become a basket case, which we hope it doesn't become.
And Priscilla, your reaction when I raised the DRC, there's a lot of fatigue, isn't there, around the kind of seemingly never-ending bad news story. It's rarely reported in foreign papers and TV channels here in the US anymore. Is the world losing interest, and is that compounding problems?
I don't think the world is losing interest. I mean, a lot of the times when we do have it reported, it's mainly reported because of the interest that is there. And I think it's, once again, it goes back to Africa. We need to be reporting this news, and perhaps we need to take it from the right angle, and then it will be carried, because I think that if it's reported and it's reported well, social media will assist in taking the news further, even though Western media are not willing to carry it. It gets to a point where you can't ignore it if it's done well.
Lamri, Ayo mentioned the hypocrisy around foreign extractive industries continuing to profit from Equatorial Guinea, DRC. And Priscilla was placing her faith, I think, in the African Union, but when we look back to apartheid and the way that Chase and Barclays were boycotted over apartheid, do you think that that could be an effective tool to mobilize people to boycott businesses that exploit countries with repressive regimes? Well,
you got to hit people where it hurts, right? And nothing hurts big multinationals more than profit. So yeah, I mean, principle, of course. But don't expect too much from multinational oil companies. They're not saints. They don't have ethics. They're gonna drill wherever they can drill. So I wouldn't hold my breath for anything meaningful to come from there. Also, let's not be too enthusiastic about these countries not selling their oil. What are they going to do? Sit on it? They have to sell it. They're not selling it to Exxon. They'll sell it to China. They'll sell it to Russia or whatever. It's all about taking ownership locally. Africa has to take ownership of these things and has to take responsibility for these things. Multinational corporations are not there to help you. They're there to make money. So we shouldn't expect anything else.
Ayo, last word from you.
We've got to sharpen up. We've got to be smarter. We've got to be understand exactly how the politics works, especially when we have rogue nations and leaders, and both more so about how multinationals are there to take from us rather than give back to us. So until we can be smart enough with the negotiations that we put on, the deals that we form with these partners, we're going to be in the same cycle of problems that we're talking about.
Hopefully we'll see a change.
I hope
First
so.
show of 2018. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't forget to follow us at RealJHUK on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. I'm Effa Hirsch. From the entire team in London, goodbye and thank you for watching Journalists Hangout UK.